Hotep Africans, as usual, it is always a pleasure to be here in Harlem. I come from Washington, D.C., which is the belly of the beast. And every time I come to Harlem, I realize that this is the pineal gland. This is the place where we tune in to a higher spiritual consciousness. And just sitting in the back of the room, listening to everything that was said this evening and seeing my dear grandmother spirit, Sister Sybil Williams Clark comes in, just made me feel good. And then seeing Dr. Ben come in just made me feel even better. And seeing Brother James Small in the back just made me feel better. So it's just so wonderful to be here in Harlem and to see so many friends who have nurtured my development over the years, who have inspired and sustained me, helps to always make this a treat to come home to Harlem. The subject matter for tonight is one that is really extensive, and typically when I talk about this subject matter, African spiritual traditions, religion and Christianity, there's never enough time. So I intentionally kind of cut back on some of the material so I wouldn't have to rush, and I'm going to do the best that I can in the time that I have to cover some basic points so that we can have some enlightenment about the subject matter. It's a subject matter that is very near and dear to my heart because as someone born in Chicago who was raised and inspired by my grandmother, who was a devout Christian, I always had strong feelings about religion. I always had strong feelings about Christianity, and I always questioned what I heard. I always questioned the images that I saw in my grandmother's Bible. And it wasn't until I heard and met Dr. Ben and heard and met Dr. Clark and heard and met Brother John Jackson, that I began to hear from my elders information that justified my inquisitive nature and taught me that it was wise to question, because we've been fooled and manipulated and taken advantage of for so long because we never questioned. And so what I want to do this evening is to share with you some research that I've been working on for the last couple of years regarding concepts and ideas of spirituality and their relationship to religion, so that we can begin to see ourselves, to see the world, and see God, and see the universe through a different set of eyes. And I'm here tonight to share this knowledge with you that I've acquired over the years. I'm not here to proselytize. I'm not here to condemn anyone. I'm really here to enlighten. And I want to discuss issues that I think are critical to our survival. I've come to understand the power of deception and how it manifests itself in myriad ways in all of our lives, and how difficult it is for people who have grown up with one ideology to open up their minds and begin to accept new concepts and ideas, particularly if they move them outside of their comfort zone. And so this is the dilemma that I'm faced with at this time, and I ask you all to bear with me. The dilemma is, how do you respond to the faithful followers of a truthful man who presents a falsehood as a sacred fact, particularly when these people don't realize that the falsehood was derived from a falsehood, which was derived from a falsehood, which was derived from a falsehood, which was derived from a deliberate distortion of sacred truths. And just because a truthful person speaks a falsehood with truthfulness and conviction doesn't make that falsehood any less false. So we've got to begin to look deeper at things that are so significant to our lives. And when I make statements like that, I typically, get that look, or where is he going, and what is he talking about? People ask me, do I believe in God? And my response to that is, no, I don't believe in God, because a belief is something that you accept without proof. I know that there is a creator, and I know that creator has manifested itself throughout time in our environment. What I don't believe is how this concept of the creator or God has been presented to us by those who are responsible for our enslavement. The very act of enslavement unqualifies someone to teach me about God. And so what I also know is that the Creator has been called many names by many people over time. God, Jehovah, Ra, Jah, Olodumare, the Great Spirit, Lukalu, Mother, Father, God, Allah, Buddha. These are all names that have been used by different people to describe the Creator as they saw the Creator. And I believe, I know, that these are legitimate expressions of a people's attempt to understand a force that is greater than them. And so I feel very strongly that there are as many names for the Creator as there are people, as there are languages. And that each of these names is a legitimate expression of a people attempting to understand a force far greater than them. I know it's a violation of the highest order to say that someone's relationship with the Creator is illegitimate because they don't call the Creator by the same name that you do. That in and of itself is wrong. I know that the God concept that was imposed upon our people was a deliberate distortion of spiritual truths that were designed specifically to keep us spiritually incarcerated, to keep us separated from a power that pervades the universe and can allow us to do great works. When I was a child, I was taught to worship like a child. I was taught to worship the God of my grandparents, a Christian European God. Many years later, I learned that this Christian European God was actually derived from African concepts of the Creator. And so the more that I began to study Africa and the people and the myths and the culture of Africa, the more that I began to see this Creator and the multiple manifestations of the Creator. I know that there is a spiritual force that pervades the universe. I know this. I know that the ancestors are real. As I was walking around and driving around the streets of Harlem this afternoon, I kept feeling the presence of Dr. Clark because his life touched me so deeply. I know and I believe in the ancestors. And I can say this from personal experience because my relationship with the ancestors, particularly my grandmother, is what has allowed me to be here before you on this evening. I know that because if I didn't have a relationship with my grandmother, who's deceased, then I would have died 3 years ago. I would have been on that plane, that Egypt Air plane that crashed on October the 31st in 1999. See, because I've been taking groups to Kemet for the last 14 years. And in 1998, I felt that I needed a break. I was tired and I wanted to do some other things. And I was debating whether or not I wanted to take a group to Kemet the following year. And I remember specifically, it was the 13th, Friday the 13th of November, 1998. I was sitting on the banks of the Nile early in the morning, meditating and just thinking about what I wanted to do next year, if I wanted to go to Kemet next year. And as I was mulling this decision over in my mind, my grandmother, who had died 2 years earlier, came to me. And she said, well, baby, if you don't want to go next year, don't go. Don't go. It's as simple as that. And just hearing the words of comfort from her allowed me to accept my decision not to go. And so the following year, typically I would take groups to Kemet in the fall, in October. And the following year, I was traveling from the West Coast back to Washington, D.C. on Halloween. I was taking a red-eye back to D.C. and to take a connecting flight in Detroit, 6 o'clock in the morning. And as I was walking past the newsstand to catch my connecting flight, I saw a headline in the newspaper, in the vending machine, that said, Egypt Air crash. And I really, looked at it, didn't really think much of it. But then when I got on the plane and took my seat, I saw a copy of the Washington Post sitting on the seat next to me, and I picked it up and read it, and I saw that Egypt Air flight, flight 990, had crashed the night before, and everybody died. And by the time I got home and checked my answering machine, I must have had at least a dozen calls from friends of mine from all over the country who were calling to see if I was all right, calling to see if I was home. And I processed all the calls, and it wasn't until that evening when I was just processing my day as I normally do and started thinking about the cause, that it struck me that if I hadn't made that decision not to go to Kemet in 1999, I would have been on that flight. That's the flight that we always take. And so it made me stop and question this relationship that we have with our ancestors. It made me question this relationship that we have with spirit, and made me understand how real it was and how important it is to cultivate this relationship and not allow others to distort it, to dilute it, to separate us from the power that exists within. And so what I want to share with you this evening is knowledge that I have acquired over the years about Africans' spiritual relationships with the Creator and how those relationships have been distorted over the years. When I was a child, I thought, I talked, and I acted like a child. I was taught to believe in heaven and hell. I was taught to believe in God and the devil. I was taught to believe in Christmas and Easter, Santa Claus, and the Easter Bunny. But when I became a man, I outgrew my childish thinking, and I replaced my childish ways with knowledge, with insight, as I fulfilled my desire to know. I came to realize that neither Santa Claus nor the Easter Bunny were real. I came to understand that originally Christmas and Easter had nothing to do with the birth, the death, and the resurrection of a man named Jesus. I learned through research that the letter J was invented around 400 years ago, and that Jesus wasn't the name of the person that we call Jesus. I learned that God and the devil were